What's up, guys? Tuesday today, and I realised yesterday, because yesterday's video in Ask Elvis was all about F1, I realised that we didn't even mention the Formula E race from Mexico City. Did you see it? What a race that was! Unbelievable! It was one of the most spectacular finishes you will ever see in a motor race, and I'm saying that not that surprised, because it's the kind of thing that happens in Formula E all the time. I know I bang on here quite a lot about trying to convince you all that FE is brilliant, because it just is. So if you didn't see it, just at least check out the closing moments. In fact, if I can find it, I'll stick it in this little gap right here.
It's going to be Pascal Wehrlein who crosses the line first to take victory in the No, it's Lucas de Grassi, takes him just before the finish line. Lucas de Grassi wins the Mexico City E-Prix with just centimetres to spare. What a finish. Well, I've never seen anything.
There you go, and that was my frantic commentary over the end. I mean, whenever I commentate on these things, I'm out of breath and heart racing by the time we get to the checkered flag, because even when you come into the last lap of a Formula E race, you generally have no idea who's going to come out on top and win the race. And that's something you cannot say about all forms of motorsport. We look for unpredictability, don't we, all the time in Formula One. That's the one thing everyone craves. Everyone moans about it getting boring because we know who the winner's going to be, or we know certainly within one or two drivers who the winner's going to be before the weekend even starts at a Grand Prix. Well, that just doesn't happen in Formula E. So if you still haven't checked out the Season 5 Formula E Championship, there's another race in a couple of weeks' time in Hong Kong. I suggest you check it out. Anyway, let's get on to Formula 1 testing, because yesterday, of course, the first day, and a couple of talking points really to come out of it. I think the first would have to be that the fact that the Ferrari was so strong. And when I talk about being strong, I'm not talking about the headline lap time, because anybody can slam in a lap time on low fuel or soft tyres or whatever. You know, you can generate your own lap times in testing, because the restrictions on what you're doing are pretty open. But the really positive thing to come out of Ferrari yesterday was the number of laps they did. Yes, the lap time was decent, but most importantly of all, the thing that you can read most into is the kind of rhetoric, the body language, the kind of mood that's coming out of that Ferrari camp. And that, for me, is the biggest change since last year. There are smiles all around the garage, and that's a big, big sign. You know, when I was working at a team, if we had a good car, you know it pretty much straight away. You know whether you've got a quick car from the very first day of testing. You know, you don't know how reliable it's going to be, you don't know how responsive it's going to be in different conditions and all those things, but you know if you have a baseline good car. And what I saw coming out of Ferrari yesterday were definite signs that that's exactly what they've got. On that same basis, we can probably read a little bit into what was coming out of the Mercedes garage yesterday, which clearly wasn't quite so good. And that's not, again, just a reflection on the lap times that were on the end of the board at the end of the day, but more about what the drivers and what the team were saying. You know, it was, you know, maybe they're just holding back. They're just trying not to be overconfident. But some of the wording of some of the little quotes coming out of the drivers and out of the team were just, to me, just suggesting hints that maybe they're not quite as happy as they would have liked to have been at this stage. That doesn't mean that they can't be happy by the time they get to Melbourne, but you always want a car that's straight out of the box. Stop jumping around. You always want a car that's straight out the box, is quick, it's responsive, it does exactly what you expect it to do, it does what the drivers expect it to do. And, you know, one telling quote from Lewis Hamilton was that the car was very different to what he expected, or very different to last year. Now, that doesn't have to mean bad, but different is probably a different way of using different words to suggest that it's not quite where he wants it to be at this point. A much more positive day for McLaren, which is great news. No, not just because Carlos Sainz Jr. finished second in the timesheets. That's kind of irrelevant because they were on different tyres to the rest, not even knowing what fuel loads or anything else is going on. So you really mustn't ever look too much into the times, but the number of laps that they managed to achieve on the very first day of a brand new season's test is really, really encouraging, because that is an area that McLaren over the last 4 or 5 years have had nothing but trouble with. And so if nothing else, it will come as a huge relief to the team, to the people inside the garage that potentially know they've got a car that at least might be reliable. From there you can start pushing the performance levels, but if you haven't got a car that runs, which is what they've been faced with for the last few seasons, well then you're scrabbling all the time to make it reliable before you can even think about trying to get any performance out of it. The big concern, of course, over the first few days of testing is Williams, and whilst missing a couple of days out of what will only be 8 days of pre-season testing isn't the end of the world. It's recoverable, it's not going to destroy your season on its own. It's far from ideal, and what it highlights is clearly some poor management, whether that's on the engineering side or the management side. Something has gone wrong in that even if they've been let down by a supplier or whatever else, the whole system has had no margin for error. It's had no backup plan. They've had no means of recovering whatever the failure might have been. And you've got to, at the end of the day, put that somehow down to the managerial input across the whole planning phase of this massive project of launching a brand new car. I'm just still not quite so sure about is Red Bull. Now, it was at this point that I realised on that walk that I had plugged in my microphone after recording that quick time lapse the wrong way round. So the cable was the wrong way round, meaning that the microphone was recording nothing for the second half of the walk, which is why there's all sorts of horrible wind noise, because it was just using the microphone on my phone. What I went on to say there was Red Bull, to me, is still a bit unknown, because there are some rumours coming out of the Formula One paddock that suggest that Honda have some issues, or Honda Red Bull have some issues around vibrations of the power unit within the chassis, and that we've heard that before. These are vibrations that are at the moment reportedly, and this is very unofficial, but this is through talking to people that I know there, reportedly stopping Red Bull running that power unit at full chat at the moment. So they're not able to use full power for sustained periods because the vibrations will end up destroying things. Now, these are very similar issues that we've seen in the past with Honda and McLaren. Also, I think to some degree with Honda Toro Rosso last year. So that's, you know, sometimes depends what it is. Sometimes that can be a quick fix, sometimes not so much. But these rumours are not normally ever without any foundation. And if that is the case, it'll be terrible news for Red Bull, because they will want to hit the ground running. If they're going to have any kind of say in this championship for 2019, they need to hit the ground running. They need to be taking the fight to Ferrari, to Mercedes. And to do that, you've got to have a reliable car straight off in testing that you can very quickly start turning the attention to performance over that reliability issue that they may be suffering with at the moment. So we need to leave it a bit longer. First day, of course, we've no idea really what's going on behind the scenes, but probably not what the very initial signs, you know, you'd want to see if you're a Red Bull fan, or indeed if you work for that team. Anyway, the other big news coming out of Formula One today was that Liberty, Formula One, have put out to tender the supply of a standard gearbox internals, gearbox cassette. Now, when I talk about the gearbox cassette, I'm talking about the ratios, the selector mechanism, the internals of a gearbox, the final drive, the differential. Those parts are going to be part of a standard supply contract from 2021 onwards. The gearbox casing, the actual gearbox that you see if you look at a car without its bodywork on, that will still be down to the teams to suit their own individual aero needs, to suit the suspension, mounting, pickup points and the structural issues of that gearbox casing. But everything inside is going to be standardised, and they're looking for people to put out or put forward a case for them to be the standard supplier for those components for every team for 2021 and beyond. Those are components that we as fans never get to see. We don't really know very much about. We know that the thing changes gear rapidly, you know, and we know every team has one. But how much performance difference do they make between one to the other when you start factoring in the cost? So performance versus cost, or performance differentiation versus cost, is probably not that great. So actually I kind of think, yeah, let's go for that. Let's make that a cheaper component for everybody. It's a little bit like the ECU, isn't it? We'd have never thought having a standardised ECU across all cars would have been a great idea, because it takes away some of that individualisation. But the reality is, none of us have noticed a difference. McLaren supply every single car on the grid with an ECU, and it makes no difference to us as a fan, as a viewer. And I suspect the internals of a gearbox casing will be exactly the same. So that is the plan for 2021. At the moment, anybody's open to put a case forward in terms of that application. It could well be one of the teams, like McLaren supply the ECU, a Formula One team using its gearbox department within the factory and all the facilities in that factory could well step that up to take part in that process and end up being the supplier for every single car on the grid. Who knows? But let me know what you think about that. I think it's not a bad idea. I think let's put resource and funds into areas of a Formula One car that we as fans can start to see the difference from. And don't forget, the motoring world, the automotive world in general, is moving away from gearboxes. Electric cars don't need gearboxes, and that is the way the automotive sector is going. So why focus so much time, energy and resource on a technology that gradually will be phased out? Let me know your thoughts. Let me know your thoughts. Discuss. Should we be keeping the technical regs as wide open as possible? And look, this is coming from a tech geek, somebody who loves innovation in Formula One, and yet here I am saying we should be standardising one of the major components. But those are my reasons behind it. I think we can focus the energy and the resource into other areas that could be far more beneficial to us as a viewer and to the wider automotive world in general, I guess too. So let me know what you think on that. Anyway, that's it for me today. We will discuss further things tomorrow. I think I'll be able to get a video out tomorrow. This dog walk has just about come to the end because the heavens are about to open.